of us might be knowing that such thing existed. Daniel Defoe wrote such a work, and people have converted that work into a short film that many of us may not be knowing. But Professor has found out that it was made into a film, and he has related it with the present pandemic scenario. How the observations, when if you have watched that short film, you could have identified, the kind of views that are expressed by that character. Now, it is all pertaining to the present scenario, as how people are discussing about whether this situation is created man-made one or naturally evolved situation. It is a same kind of discussion will be going on in the movie also. So that shows now how much he takes efforts for delivering an hour's lecture. So this is what an inspiring quality with most of our resource persons, and this, as many of you from our place might be knowing, that how much he spends, or how much serious he is about sharing his knowledge. And today, now he will be talking about presentism. The broad topic is theory after theory. So in that, he will be talking about presentism, the scenario of theory in the present day context. So with all the learned participants, here I could see Professor Mark sir has joined, and Professor Vincent sir has joined, and many of the learned people have joined. I welcome all our learned faculty members, all our learned scholars who made this occasion a really wonderful one. And I invite, on behalf of all the participants, on behalf of the Department of English, I invite Professor Dr. Prabahar to deliver his lecture on presentism. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Batkunaban. Good morning to all. Honorable Vice Chancellor of Bharat University, the most respected registrar, the incumbent head of the department, Dr. Nagaraj, the organizer of this program, Dr. Batmanaban, my young dynamic colleagues in the Department of English, Bharat University, Dr. David, Dr. Kasirajan, Dr. Vinod, Dr. Ashita, and my dear participants. I consider this a privilege to be a part of this particular workshop on the new critical trends and also the research scenario in English studies. And I recognize the presence of the doyens of English, like Professor Vincent Soundaram, an eminent scholar, writer, translator, a good orator, and my friend Professor Dunstan, Joseph Dunstan, former Chancellor of the University of Nagaland, and my long-time associate, my friend, my well-wisher, and the person with whom I always share my knowledge, Dr. Professor Marx, and my other participants. Good morning once again. I think that I have shared a video, and I was telling Dr. David and Dr. Batmanaban, the video is more important than my lecture. Half of my message is conveyed through the 7 minutes short film. I will come to that video later. The topic that I would like to discuss today, I have given a very broad topic earlier. It was the topic is theory after theory, and in theory after theory, I prefer to speak on public as private, time, history, and presentism. Let me repeat my topic again. Public as private, time, history, and presentism. I have organized my lecture like this. Number one, that I define the critical theories in the contemporary sense. taking the great theorists like Professor Doherty and Terry Eagleton into consideration. And my definition of theory after theory is based on Terry Eagleton's after theory and also Professor Doherty. Terry Eagleton, he borrowed the title only from Doherty's after theory. So this is number one. I would like to define what is after theory, theory after theory. Number two, while defining the theory after theory, I also have taken Peter Barry into consideration. Peter Barry is the beginning of critical theories, the fourth edition. And in the fourth edition, the last chapter is theory after theory, in which he classifies this theory after theory into three broader terms. He calls the theory after theory, the modern contemporary theory, is new aesthetics. Number one, new aesthetics. Number two, presentism. Number three, cognitive poetics. I prefer to speak on the presentism. Number three, I also try to explain what is presentism, and after discussing what is the key factors or the features of this presentism, I have a case study, and the case study is one of the most interesting texts people might have not even heard of. A book written by Daniel Defoe, The Journal of the Plague Year in 1720. So I have taken the historical text, say some 300 years old, exactly 300 years old text, the Journal of the Plague Year, to interpret the text in the present day or against the present day COVID-19 situation using the theory presentism. And my last part of my lecture will be on the present day COVID situations, and how this present day COVID situations is very much subjective, where the public can be made private and the private can be made public, and how time and history are reflected in this presentism and vice versa. So this is how that I have organized my lecture today, public as private, time, history, and presentism. I request the admin to share the slides now. Right, in my first slides that I have given three important quotes. Number one, by Terry Eagleton. Fate pushed Roland Barthes under Parisian laundry van and afflicted Michel Foucault with AIDS. Roland Barthes died in an accident, and Michel Foucault died of AIDS. It dispatched Lacan, Williams, Bourdieu, and banished Louis Althusser to a psychiatric hospital for murdering his wife. He was convicted for murdering his wife. And Terry Eagleton says, it seems that God was not a structuralist. But I just give this definition in order to arouse the interest of the participants. And this is a quote. I have taken it from Terry Eagleton's After a Theory. In the introduction, he introduces after theory only by giving a historical account on Roland Barthes, Michel Foucault, and of course, this Louis Althusser. And as a case study that I take this Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe, and there is an imaginary character, HF, Henry Foe, right? Might be uncle of Daniel Defoe, an imaginary character, and this was rather one of the literary features of the prose fiction of the period, the early fiction. And there is an imaginary character, Henry Four. And Henry Four, say, while during this plague year, he was very much low in his confidence and spirit. And he opened the Bible, and quite accidentally, he happens to read Psalm 91. Therefore, I have given my second quote from Psalm 91, which Henry Four, an imaginary protagonist in the journal of the plague year, read. I will say of the Lord, this is a prayer. He is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In him will I trust. Surely he shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. I prefer to speak on this pestilence as presentism. And the God shall save me from this pestilence, and there shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come thy dwelling. Neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. Thou house shall not be affected by this plague. So this is a reading from Psalm 91. And Psalm 91, it concludes saying, then no harm will befall you, no disaster will come near your tent. And I just give these three quotes. And these three quotes in order to rather keep the audience, in order to call the attention of the audience. Right. I'll go to my next slide, my slide number 2. It is man versus the world. My slide number 2. Next slide, please. And this is, right, I have taken it from Terry Eagleton. The humanities had lost their innocence. They could no longer pretend to be untainted by power. So we are living in a contemporary world where the humanities have lost their innocence, and they could no longer pretend to be untainted by the power. And if they wanted to stay in business, I mean, in the intellectual or in forming one's episteme or in forming one's system of knowledge, it is now vital that they pass to reflect on their own purposes and assumptions. Friends, a critical theory as a school of thought, from this Frankfurt School of Thought, it emerged as a tool to emancipate humanity from slavery. And Terry Eagleton, in his book After Theory, he argues that if a human being wants to say in the business, by business he means the formation of knowledge. It is now very vital that we pass to reflect on our own purposes and assumptions. So knowledge is very much a purpose-oriented. Knowledge is based on the personal assumptions. It is this critical self-reflection which we know as theory in the contemporary world. So critical theory, from right from the liberal humanism to the modern eco-critical approaches, right? And all these theories, they had a very formal school of thought. But presentism or modern contemporary critical theory, in the words of Terry Eagleton, Doherty, Peter Barry, and others, is based predominantly on self-reflection, which we call it as a theory. And this capitalism, it needs a human being who has never yet existed, and at the same time, one who is prudently restrained in the office, and wildly anarchic in the shopping mall. So this is the existence of a modern man, the state, right, the state of being a modern man. We need to be prudently restrained in our office, and at the same time, we must go wild in the shopping mall, right? And we must be very much liberative, and we must be a freak in shopping mall, but highly restrained in our office. My next slide. So if this is the condition of a modern man, if this is the existence of the modern self or the modern soul in a capitalist world, how does he react, or how does he form his own episteme? And say my next slide, it talks about what is new in the business, right? And in the business, here it is the formation of knowledge and what we call the background information or the background knowledge. And what is new in the business? As I have already said, Peter Barry, in his introduction to modern critical theories, the fourth edition, beginning critical theories, the fourth edition, he speaks about the future of literary theory and the new schools of thought that seem to return to some older ideas. Right after this eco-criticism, perhaps the last but one, right? He talked about the eco-critical perspective, the queer theory, and other things. And this is the last chapter in the fourth edition, where he talks about the future of literary theory. And Barry says, he mentioned the common feeling that the real business of literary theory is already over. That it is already over. He cites, that as I have already discussed, Thomas Doherty's 1990 book, After Theory, and Terry Eagleton's reused the title After Theory for his own book in 2003. And he implies that theory is still over, so to speak. And one of the reasons for this feeling that the theory is over may be that theory is no longer a newsworthy. Theory is no longer newsworthy. It might be claimed because there has been a general acceptance of many of its key ideas. So its impact and charisma have been routinized. So this is the point that Peter Barry is rather talking about. The schools of thought, the modern critical theories, they have in fact they don't. He doesn't claim that the days of theory are over, but he claims that the charisma and the impact of the critical theories have been rather diminished, because now the critical theories have been routinized and they have been made a routine. Right from say the modern critical theory, from liberal humanism and to the modern eco criticism, they have been made a routine. And Barry expressed apprehension and also Thomas Doherty that the days of theory are over. Yet he claims these are the three modern disciplines, right? The presentism, the new aesthetics, and also the cognitive poetics, or the present schools of thought, or the present critical insights or inquiry that might rather arouse the interest of an individual who has been so dormant in his office and active in the shopping malls. And literary theory, it did not disappear. Or Peter Barry and Terry Eagleton and other theorists, they never claimed that theories have become irrelevant. Rather, it evolved into new forms of theory that borrow from their predecessors. And here, I would like to speak on the second aspect that Peter Barry, Terry Eagleton, and Doherty, they discuss the presentism. And let me now explain what is a presentism. in my next slide, I talk about T.S. Eliot's the famous lines in the four quarters. Time both perhaps present in time of future and time future contained in a time past. This is T.S. Eliot. And then what is presentism? To make it very simple, presentism, it is an approach to literature which is oriented towards text meaning in the present, as opposed to historicist approaches oriented to meanings in the past. So, to make it very simple, this presentism, in a way, it opposes the historicist approach to the text. It is not the historical reading of a text, but because the literary critics' inability to reconstruct or recapture the past, we can never know its true identity. The most important aspect of this presentism and the presentist literary critic is that it actively seeks out the present in the past, of course, with a subjective element. So this is very important. Right? The subjective element is very much there. It is what we try to consume of the text. It is what my personal interest, it is what my subjective knowledge that rather makes me interpret or makes me read and comprehend the text. And I also use the T.S. Eliot's these two lines. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. And say this is a warning. This is a warning to the participants and to the listeners about this presentism. And this presentism too has its own limitation. And in my next slide, I talk about how to interpret a text by using the presentist approaches. The permanence of the present's role in all our dealings with the past. And we cannot make with a past unshaped by our own concerns. So says the proponents of this presentism, Huck Grady and Terence Fox, that we cannot simply make contact with the past unshaped by our own concern. And so the statement here, it is negative in its formulation, but the meaning here is we can make contact with the past shaped by our own concern. So this is the key, the element of presentism. We only shape, right? An individual shapes or individual makes contact with the past. And the presentist, and for all these theories, they take Shakespeare as a case study, and they revisit Shakespeare's text, almost all his text, and they find out the present day relevance, of course, with a subjective element. And I also rather give a clue to the participants. This presentism is opposed to historicist tendency to read the text. And at the same time, it also slightly differs from new historicism. That this new historicism is rather the subversion of knowledge. It also talks about the subjective interpretation of a historical text. And at the same time, new historicism is giving prominence to the petty narratives. They don't consider only the meta-narratives or the cultural critic. They also talk about the petty narratives, the small narratives, and the parallel narratives that we find in pamphlets, advertisements, and in other things. And this presentism, it differs right from this new historicism, right in its individual perspective. Right, this presentism, it is an individual. He makes contact with the past. He makes contact with the historical text or with the past history, and his conscience or his consciousness is shaped by his own personal contact, right, or his own personal likes and dislikes. And presentism is very much interested in understanding how a literary text is experienced in the present. The theoretical approach of this presentism, it acknowledges that our experience of the present, as we simply say, the critics, the readers, the spectators, the students, they inevitably shape our experience of the literary text. So here, the text is very much shaped by our own present experiences, by an individual or by an individual reader or by a critic. And the historicists, they approach the text with an aim to understand a text in its own historical context. And that is why that we talk about the background knowledge. Dr. David, is my video coming?
No, sir, your video is passed, sir. Your audio is connected, video is passed.
How about now?
Now also the same thing, sir. It is not.
But my video is very much there. I think that after the phone call, that do I have to disconnect and come back?
I think
Yes, sir. It will be.
that will be better, sir. That will be better.
Yes, sir.
Dr. David?
Sir, now it is visible, sir.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay then. Okay. So the time, I'm talking about the historicist approach and presentism. However, this is rather the central point of this presentism. Presentism, however, understands a text through a context in which it is consumed, in which it is perceived, in which it is very consciously interpreted. So presentism, it differs from the historicist tendency. It also differs from the new historicism in the sense that it tries to understand a text through the context in which it is consumed. And presentism, it also has, the text has got two functions. And we also talk about, say, this Roman Jacobson's, this referential function in my next slide. Say, presentism has got a function, it has got a referential function. My next slide, please. The presentism is especially pertinent for, say, the key theories of this presentism till today are based on Shakespeare's text. And Flaherty, he points out that a performance is by nature and which is a preamble to its context and generated through encounters with a living culture. So every text, right, every text of the past, it is only a preamble. It is a preamble to the present day context. And to an extent, we can also, right, we can also simply say, even the text written during that period, even the text written during this Renaissance, it is rather a presentist in reaction to the past events. And there is always a claim, the presentists, they claim that Shakespeare has encountered the great plagues, and Shakespeare has lived all through the plague years, right? All through the plague years and all through the epidemic. And there is also a claim that there is a claim that there's a claim, it says there was a lockdown in England, there was a lockdown in London, and therefore the theatres were hardly open for 9 months. And Shakespeare, that all the time he was rather pondering over the plague, pondering over this pandemic and this epidemic. And therefore, every text written in the past and every text that read in the present is a preamble to a context, which is very much existing in the present. And this context is generated through encounters with a living culture. Right? And say we encounter the text only with the present day culture. The present day culture is very much consumerist. The present day culture is very much individualistic. The present day culture is highly self-referential, and therefore knowledge is also self-expressive, self-referential, self-centered, and yet rather that it permeates, or it is predominantly knowledge is predominantly a self-oriented. And presentism thus highlights what has been termed a drama's performative function. That a drama has a performative function. A text as a performance. A text as a performance in the past, and perhaps as a modification of its referential function in the present. So this is what the present is. They talked about Shakespeare's text. They had two functions: a performative function in the past and a referential function in the present. And this performative function, it could be of the author, it could be of the artist, it could be of the audience of the particular era or the particular stage. But a text has got its referential function transcending the time and interacting with the present culture, and it has got a referential function. And the critical inquiry of this presentism, which I discuss in my next slide, right? And this presentism, it considers one's own present context, which is being very much experienced by an individual. And Shakespeare's play, right, we can very well talk about Macbeth, we can very well talk about Hamlet and Midsummer Night's Dream, All for Love, and all these texts, that historical text in the present context with the present culture. And these contemporary political, social, and economic ideologies, in fact, the discourses and the events that relate to the past text as a reading moment. So it is very much clear what has prompted you. This is the basic question of presentism. What has prompted a reader to read the old text? What is the context? What is the present context that has rather led the reader to read the past text? And what is the context? Why you are interested in seeing that particular video today? Why we are interested to read Daniel Defoe's unheard text, the journal of the plague year today, because we have got a present day relevance. That it is only the present day relevance that prompts a reader to read the text in the past. And we tend to think about the past and the present as definitively separated and even as opposites. So the present is not the corollary of the past, or the past is not just an extension or say the preconditions of the present. And sometimes the present doesn't coexist with the past. The present can very well be pitted against the past. It can very well be used as a tool to negotiate, a tool to encounter and to encounter the past and the past events. And How might one describe the relationship between the past and the present in his critical inquiry? And we are talking about, right? We are talking about the roles, right? The roles of the future in presentism, and say the critical inquiry of this presentism, as Peter Barry puts forth and concludes. If we consider the past and the present to be important, should we also be thinking about the future? Right? Should we also be thinking about the future? Because right, I said that man, right? I said man is highly individualistic, and so is his pattern of knowledge, and so is his system of knowledge, and so is his critical inquiry and his critical thought. And as a case study, what has made me choose, what has made the participants read, or why this text is relevant in the present context. As a case study, I have chosen Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year, which was published right first in the year 1722, which I discuss in my next slides. Right, and as I said, this disease, it was called a visitation, the last great visitation. The visitation, it could be the blessings of God, and it could also be the curse of God, and it is ordained by God. And even in my first slide, that I have given you the background about Henry IV, the imaginary protagonist of this Journal of the Plague Year, who opened the Bible and read Psalm 91. My tent shall not be disturbed by any evil or by any pandemic or any pestilence. So this is ordained by God. The Journal of the Plague Year, right, and most of you might not have heard of this text, and it is relevant, right? It becomes relevant, or it gained currency only in this COVID-19. So this is the point that I would like to reiterate or like to emphasize. It is the present discourse. It is the present condition. It is the present ideology. It is the present circumstances that rather make one choose the text by Defoe, A Journal of the Plague Year, which was published some 300 years back. Right? And he considers it a last visitation. And the period, right, Daniel Defoe's, the biography, he lived between 1660 and 1731. And in this text, the Journal of the Plague Year, he talked about the plague in Europe, in Marseilles, the bubonic, right, the bubonic plague in Marseilles and in London in the year 1665, right, 1665. So to open the journal in 1722, it was to open up a past truer than fiction while confronting the dire suspicion of the last great visitation might not after all have been the last. And these are the words of Defoe. That he says that this is a last great visitation, and it might not after all have been the last. So this presentism, it has got its own apprehension, say for the future too. He calls it the last great visitation, and at the same time might not after all have been the last. It is doubly paradoxical fascination of a book that it is a dystopian fiction rooted in the past and a work of a creative art that summons up a world uncreated, right? Uncreated both in the present and also in the past. Dear participants, in all my slides that I have given a media, the title of the books that I have referred to formulate my lecture, this topic, and also the key seminal text and the key figures of this presentism. In my next slide, this public, I rather titled my lecture as public as private, and I borrowed this term, this public as private, from Daniel Defoe. And he says that this is, I have given the media in the left margin. This is the title page, the journal of the original title page with the publication in 1722. In fact, he took 8 years to write this journal, to publish this journal. And there was a great expectation of this journal in the year 1720. And I have chosen this text in 2020. It has got a personal interest. Let me rather conclude. It has got a, I will explain when I conclude that. Say 1720 in 2020, 300 years, it has got its own relevance. It has got its own personal interest. It has got its own ideological and ideological, contextual, historical relevance in the present day context. And Journal of the Year, say this 1720, where he talks about the occurrences, right? He records the occurrences as the public of a private. He calls it, I record the occurrences of London in the year 1665. It is my private observations, and now I make it as public. In fact, Daniel Defoe is called the father of modern journalism. And Daniel Defoe's this particular text, the journal of the plague year, has been called a history, and many consider this particular text a historical text, and some they dismiss this as fictitious, and in fact there are few fictitious characters like HF, John, and others. Therefore, they dismiss this. They don't consider it as history, and they call it fiction. So there is always a difference of opinion between the scholars whether this text could be considered fact or fiction. But that is not our concern. We talk about is a text which was written in 1720, which aroused some kind of interest in the present day context. Therefore, I read it. And I interpret the text with the present context of COVID-19. And this text is an account of one man's experience. It is an experience of a man, HF of the year 1665. This HF was a saddler. Right? He was making he was making instruments. He was making apparatus connected with horses, saddles, right, and all. And he was a saddler. In this particular book, he talks about the bubonic plague that struck the city of London in what became known as the Great Plague of London, the last epidemic of the plague in that city. And he considered it last epidemic of the plague in that city. But now we understand, we know that COVID, that Great Britain and UK is one of the most affected countries in the world, right? Say in this present day pandemic. Even the Prime Minister himself was rather tested positive, and he recovered from this illness. And this book, it also provides tables of casualty figures. And I request the participants to read the text, because there you have a lot of data, the facts and figures, how many were quarantined, all the same discourse that we use in the present day context. And some of the text, some of the words used in the text have got a present day relevance. And say in the later publications of this text, this journal of the year, it also got an image with a mask. And therefore, I say that it has got a present day relevance. It provides the tables of casualty figures and discusses the credibility of various accounts and anecdotes received by the narrator. And let me go to my next slide. In that, I have given two important media, right? And you can very well, if Dr. David could rather expand these figures these two images, it is well and good. And it is now the image in the left, it is about the toddler. And I'm talking about the saddler, and it is about a toddler who was waking, right? Who was waking his dead mother, right? A dead mother who was heading towards Bihar from Uttar Pradesh. And you might have seen, right? You might have seen this image of this COVID-19, right? This COVID-19, where the toddler was waking up the dead mother. And I have also given another image in the right. It is about Mother Elizabeth, and this is a very famous portrait of the plague 1665, where the mother was pulling the corpses of the dead children. And these two have got a relevance. That these two pictures, these two visuals have got relevance in the present day context. A mother pulling the mother pulling the dead corpses of the children, and a boy, a son, a toddler, an innocent toddler, is waking the dead mother up. And this is plague 1665. This is how I interact. This is how I understand the text, the journal of the plague year. And HF, right, that imaginary character, he tells many stories of how the people of London were affected by the plague. And there were many stories that include the tales of the grieving fathers, graced men running through the streets, people throwing themselves into the burial pits due to pain or grief, committing suicides, right? And husbands trying to support their families. There is a gender violence, there is a domestic violence, and people blaspheming the name of God. And we also have similar experiences in the present. This pandemic is ostracized. This pandemic has given a kind of it has created many religious phobia, and we have got the blasphemy in the name of God, houses being looted, and the people trying to escape the city, and people are trying to escape from Chennai, people are trying to escape from the cities, and we could not even cross our district borders. And these are all the problems, and we cannot travel to other towns in search of this reprieve. So these were the conditions of the year 1665. Murders, arsons, suicides, looting, violence, molestation, and people, they tried to escape from the cities, and people lived in constant fear in their locked homes, as we are now. And Henry IV is keen, a saddler, he is keen to debunk rumors. We have got many rumors at present that say this has been, I would say, COVID, it is not the social distancing, it is not the social isolation, it is not the domestic isolation, it is not the house or home isolation, and this COVID-19, I would say, it has been criminalized. It has been, and this is, I would call it a social denigration. This has never been considered a disease, and this has been considered a kind of a crime, a heresy, a sin, or a curse given by God in the present. And my mother-in-law, the old lady, a septuagenarian old lady, she used to call the sin, she calls it a sin disease. And he is very confident that she would not be affected by this disease because it is not a disease, it is a sin, and she is a holy devote. And she is a true, a pious, she is a pious, a follower of God. And therefore, she is very confident that she will not be affected by this. But COVID-19 does not spare. It does not spare a hermit, does not spare Pope, does not spare a clergy, does not spare a prime minister. It does not spare race, or it does not spare gender. And this was the discourse that we had in 1665. And HF, he is very keen to debunk rumors, That was all chaos in the city during the plague. He is sympathetic to the plight of the poor, and he refuses to believe the sordid rumors that surround the days of plague. He muses on the cause of the plague, and he talks about what causes the plague and how it is spread, rejecting the outlandish explanations, but concluding that while it must have some human causes, it is from God. So this is the observation of Henry IV in the 1665. It is sent by God. And my next slide, Dr. David, now am I visible? I received some comments saying that my video is not seen.
Sir, you're visible, sir. You're visible.
Okay, right. And say the next media, right? It is about two friends, Mohammed Sayub. Right? I say all my videos, they have got their contextual relevance. I pick those medias with my own justifications to make. Here are two friends, Mohammed Sayub. He ensured Amrit Kumar. Muhammad ensured Amrit to say he ensured Amrit, and he cradled his dying friend head in his lap. And this media was very much viral in the social platforms, and also in the print media, and cradling his friend's head in his lap. And I always talk about Daniel Defoe. Only my pictures, they are contemporary, but the quotes are only from the journal. September is the worst month. I'm quoting from journal. September is the worst month of the plague, and we are all waiting for the September to come. That is why I have chosen to speak on this. This is July, right? This is July, and we are expecting a great danger in September. And September is the worst month of the plague. But eventually, the bills begin to reveal that the distemper is abating. That the distemper is a disease. The distemper is a viral disease. And Daniel Defoe claims that the distemper will have its spike, or will have its peak in September. And today or tomorrow, we are waiting for the news, or we are aspiring for, or we are rather waiting for the lockdown 6.0 or 7 or lockout 2.0 or 3.0. So just imagine, this is July and September. So perhaps July is the cruelest month, not April. And September is the worst month of the plague, but eventually the bills begin to reveal that the distemper is abating. Less people were becoming infected, and those who were ill were getting better much faster. And this is an account of Daniel Defoe. And we also now claim people, or the rate of recovery is higher in India when comparing it with other nations. For a while, this information actually has a negative impact, as the people who saw the bills became careless and accidentally spread the plague even further. We have got COVID idiots. We have got COVID idiots. They don't wear masks, and they don't bother about the social distancing. They don't bother about the social safety, and they don't rather mind infecting others. Defoe talks about vegetable market. Defoe talks about fish market. Defoe talks about the shops, the shops and the merchants in this journal, and he talks about the general. He talks about the public who are reckless and who are quite ruthless, innocent in affecting or in infecting others quite accidentally spreading the plague even further. But thankfully, the evidence that the plague was disappearing was validated sometime later. And HF, he observes that while many people are truly grateful for their deliverance and try to live their lives differently, very, very important, most, right, most of the people, they return to their old sinful ways and appear to have learned nothing from their trials. And when, right, in the month of April, in the month of Dr. David, is it my problem or the problem?
Sir?
Am I visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Dr. David said the power is off in.
Here, sir, but it has come back,
Right,
sir. No problem.
right. So when it was when during the month of April and May, we were all frightened. We were all afraid of this COVID, and we were all afraid of going out of home, and we all turned moralistic, God-fearing, and philanthropic, and Puritans to an extent. But as days passed by, in the month of June, July, that we resorted to our old forms of violence, subjugation, discriminations, and all our criminal activities. And Daniel Defoe, he warns when that in the beginning people were afraid, but later they resorted their sinful ways and appeared to have learned nothing from this plague. We also have learned nothing from this COVID. We have become normal with all our abnormal activities. And I have given three important events that rather appeals to me personally. Number one, two friends go home today. One of them died. I could not have left him alone. His parents waited. That was the cry of Muhammad Sayyub in May 18, 2020. May was the month where there was some other different sentiments in the entire country. And here is Muhammad Sayyub. He was crying for his mate. He was crying for his brother. He was crying for his friend. And he said, I couldn't have left him alone. His parents waited. This was the news in May 18, 2020. Yesterday, there was a news in Outlook, 28th July 2020. COVID positive woman alleges molestation by doctor, admitted with her at isolation ward of Noida Hospital. Outlook, 28th July 2020. And I have got a very personal thing from my town, Tirunelveli, where the famous Irtukadai, the owner of this Irtukadai Alva, he committed suicide the moment he came to know that he was tested positive. Right, Tirunelveli, Irtukadai Alva store owner Hari Singh commits suicide after being found COVID-19 positive. This is the news that we have got in June 25, 2020. I leave the whole thing. Right? I'm just reading out from Daniel Defoe's The Journal, and it has got the present day discourse. It appeals to our present day context, to the ideology, and to the situations, the circumstances. And I read the plague, I read the journal with my personal experience. Right? The plague, it perturbs, it disturbs. And I have come across a lot of poems in the Facebook and also in the social media. And one of my friends, Professor Joseph Dunstan, has written a poem, Perturbance, right? Perturbed, right? He also wrote a poem on the religious prayers. And he said that he was perturbed, he was disturbed by this COVID-19. And how does plague disturbs? And this COVID-19 pandemic, and in the left side margin that I have given a text in my next slide, COVID-19 pandemic The increase in domestic violence, what can we do? The increase in gender violence. Now I read Defoe. Henry IV, he tells horrifying stories of people who were imprisoned in their own homes because someone in their household had contracted the plague. And more often than not, the plague came to the households through their servants. Through their servants. And there was a belief that it was through the servants. And now it is through everyone. The house would be locked from the outside, and a red cross would be painted on the door. And this was the sign of pestilence. This was the sign of epidemic. And now there is a poster by a corporation or by municipality or by the Panchayat Union, and which says that here lives a COVID patient, a social isolation, a social criminalization, a social denigration. And it's a social, I would say that this is a social, a very conscious attempt of alienation, exclusion. And the house would be locked from outside, and the red cross would be painted on the door. The very action could condemn some people to death. At the very action. That is why the Irtukadai Alva owner, he committed suicide, not because that he could not be recovered. And there was a news because of the negligence shown by his own beloved, his own loved ones, that he committed suicide. This very action could condemn some people to death, as they were trapped with others who had the virus. And the moment people, they thought that they were contracted this disease, they commit suicide. And in 1665, watchmen were appointed in the streets, and they would then be placed in front of the house of the infected. And this watchman, that he would rather he would guard the entire house and also the street. I have now talked about the video that I shared, and it is based on Defoe's this particular journal. And there it is about a pigwick maker who rather through his and he depicts his experiences, the experiences that he has encountered during this plague from his locked home, and through his window he could see the corpses and the watchman throwing the dead body. Right, and it was an Oscar winning short film, and there was a little girl, and the spirit of the little girl came and told the wig maker that she would die, and she was also infected. She was quarantined, and the spirit came and told the wig maker that she would die tomorrow, and she died. And the next day, he went to the mass burial ground, cut the lock of the hair, made a wig, and he was wearing that wig, hoping that he was lying, wearing the wig, hoping that the future will be all right. So that was the pig wig maker, the video that I have shared, where you could have seen the role of the watcher, the role of the watchman, how he throws the dead body, how he locks the doors, and how cruel that he looks even in that animation, even in that animated video. And the very action could condemn some people to death. And some people, they managed to escape through the various doors in the homes. Or mobs would sometimes attack the watchmen and help them escape. And say people who were tested positive, some of my friends who went to the quarantine ward, who went to the isolation wards, and they rather talk about this kind of experiences. And they say that it is very cruel, that it is very cruel in the quarantine wards, because both say the attendants and also the patients, they behave in a very different manner. And others, they escape by giving watchmen a bribe. 1665. That by giving a watchman a bribe, people, they escape from the hospitals. People, they escape from their locked home. And same is the case Right, same is the case now. If you want to cross borders, right, you'll have to, right, and today my daughter showed me a WhatsApp message, a meme, and which read, in 2020, I have no other objective except getting this pass, this e-pass. Perhaps that is the objective, that is the motivation one gets in the year 2020, obtaining e-pass to cross the district border. And it was a nasty business. In 1660 itself, it became a nasty business and horrible for the involved. And in my next slides, Defoe himself says, regardless of race and gender, people get affected. And it is not the religion, it was not the race, it was not the gender, it was not the region. Everyone gets affected by this pandemic, by this epidemic, by this disease. The narrative ends abruptly. The journal, it ends abruptly, and Ketchup, he refuses to analyze the lack of humanity that he sees around him. He says, I can go no further here. That I can go no further here. I should be counted censorious and perhaps unjust if I should enter into the unpressing work of reflecting whatever cause there was for it upon the unthankfulness and return of all manner of wickedness among us. That the wickedness among us, which I was much an eyewitness of myself, that which I was much an eyewitness of myself. I have given 3 statistics, one in 3rd May 2020 by Evidence Kadir. And Evidence Kadir says, in May 2020, at least 25 cases of caste atrocities against Dalits in 1 month. This marks 40% increase in such cases during this COVID lockdown. Right, 40% increase in such cases, Kadir, and you can very well, right, you can very well check it with the Wire, 3rd May 2020. And I have given another response. There is a response that we are all aware of. The religious discrimination is hindering the COVID-19 response of race, religion, and pandemic. And we understand the religious phobia in India and also abroad, like how a black was killed by the police officers, Floyd, how he was killed, how the blacks were killed, right, by the constables in, UK, and the incidents in this Sathangulam, right, and we can very well relate to this plague year 1665, and now the burial of the dead, right, and the burial of the dead in my next slide, that I talk about how we give burial to the dead, the deceased, to the persons affected by this disease. And I'm reading, you just listen to me, that the burial of the dead by this visitation be at most convenient hours, always either before sunrising or after sunsetting, with the privity of the church wardens of the or constables, or not otherwise, or that no neighbors nor friends be suffered to accompany the corpse. No neighbors nor friends were allowed to accompany the corpse to church or to enter the house visited, upon pain of having his house shut up or be imprisoned, and that no corpse dying of infection shall be buried or remain in any church in time of common prayer, sermon, or lecture. That corpse dying of infection, right? No corpse of dying infection shall be buried, and that no children be suffered at time of burial of any corpse in any church, churchyard, or burying place to come near the corpse, coffin, or grave, and that all the graves shall be at least 6 foot deep. Exactly. But I say you might wonder whether I am reading anything from the contemporary newspaper, but this is the plague in 1665, written in 1720. And further, all public assemblies but other burials are to be forbidden during the continuance of this visitation. And this is the text, right? I read, right? I read only the text, right? All this time I read only the text from the journal. And the media I have given at the bottom is about my reflection on this COVID-19 and how did I interpret this COVID-19 and how I rather, right, why I am interested in reading this Daniel Defoe's The Plague of the Year 1665, because my friend, my acquaintance, my hostel mate, Dr. Simon, was denied a decent burial in Chennai. Right? And say, this is how that I responded, right? I responded to the burial of my friend in my next slide. The burial of my friend, Dr. Simon, my hostel mate, my senior, right, my senior in the college, right, and my dear participants, if you happen to visit my Facebook, that you can very well read my reactions to this COVID-19. Right, I'm not HF, right, I'm not Henry Ford, I'm not Daniel Defoe, but most of us, we have made the public as private, and we have made our private sentiments as public, as a public text in this COVID-19. I call it a social institution. I call it a discourse. And this sense of awareness, this particular pandemic sense has rather made us make our private public and made our public private. I call it time, history, and the presentism. In my next slide, I rather responded to these COVID-19 situations. My next slide, please. I have only 3 more slides, and this is the poem, or I could say that a small, a humble elegy that I have written in response to the denial of the burial of Dr. Simon in Chennai, because the people, right, the people were terribly afraid of, right, afraid of the infection. And I titled, The Chennai Doctor Denied Dignity in Death. And this is rather a Christian theme. That the Christian theme that everyone should be, that the blessed are those who are given a decent burial. That in fact, that is the prime objective of every human being after death. That it is not after theory. Life after death, life after all your intellectual responses, all your responses, that life after that you must be given a decent burial. That giving a decent burial is a state affair. It has to be made a rule. But Dr. Simon was not given, say, a decent burial in a burial, and I responded to this situation on 20th April 2020. I have written a poem. I reacted. I made my private sentiments public. I said, through no fault of him, Dr. Simon was a sportsman. He was an athlete. He represented our country. He represented our state. That he was an athlete. Have I come back?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The death of gratitude and compassion was plated with the crown of pestilence, the dead man's destiny. And I call the next slide. Say, this is a response, right? We clap for the medicos, but deny them burial. And I'm quoting, right? I'm quoting the words of Dr. Anbumani, the former cabinet minister, right? The former cabinet minister of social health, right? The social health. Say we will serve the doctor of medicine, and Dr. Anbumani, he said, we clap for medicos, but deny them burial. And my poem, it continues. A dead won't sneeze or cough of another's death. Fear spreads fear, robs of all the good from heart. Alone, he buried his friend. And say this was rather made public by another doctor who buried, right, the dead body, the corpse by himself. The attendants, the hospital attendants were beaten, and those who went to the churchyard were beaten by the public. And the High Court of Tamil Nadu, it rather took the case as a suo motu, and it arrested the people who were all involved in this particular thing. And how brutal that we have become. And it robs of all the good from heart. Alone, he buried his friend, a lead mourner to lamentation. At the loss of sanity, I would call a burial of the blood. That it is not the burial of the dead, a burial of the blood. May the earth not receive the people. This is the last prayer in Christianity. May the earth receive the people, and may the earth not receive the people with the fear of being unburied. That we all had, right? The COVID-19 had created a panic. It is not a pandemic. It has created a social panic that we have the fear of being unburied. Who shall bury me if I were dead? Not him, but we who are dead. And this is my presentist response to this COVID-19. Right? My personal response to this COVID-19 and to the situations. And to conclude the presentism, I again quote from Daniel Defoe. Right? My last slide, please. Never made public before, the last visitation. I shall conclude the account of this calamitous year. And 2020 is an year of calamity. And 2020 perhaps is the most cursed year of my life. And since this calamitous year, therefore, with the coarse but sincere stanza of my own, which I placed at the end of my ordinary memorandums, the same year they were written. And Daniel Defoe, he concludes, right? He concludes his history. He concludes his response. He concludes his text says, a dreadful plague in London was, in the year 65, which swept 100,000 souls away. Yet, I alive, HF finished. Thank you very much. Yet, I'm alive.
Thank you, sir. So we shall go for some questions, one or two questions. Dear participants, if you have any questions, you may ask by unmuting your mic, and you may ask, or otherwise, you may put your questions in the chat box, please. So there is a question, sir. How thesis and research papers can be written with the theme of
I also read it. I also read this question. So this is rather a student's anxiety. This is a researcher's anxiety, and this is what we call the presentist approach, which is very much consumerist in its tendency, which is very much self-oriented. This is rather a kind of a new emerging, that is a new emerging area. One must be that one must know what is his personal like, and how does he develop his or her discourse, like how one develops his or her interest and discourse. If you are right, if you are aware of, if you are right, if you are clear about what is your preference, right, what is your preference, you can very well take any old text or even the contemporary text and work on that. Perhaps I would suggest this pandemic literature with, say, you just imagine, I was reading both I was rather showing both newspapers and reading passages from Daniel Defoe. At the moment that we say Daniel Defoe, we are all aware only of Robinson Crusoe. And Daniel Defoe has written another novel, The Storm, another historical account, The Storm, and say that is about the natural disaster. And that is why that I said Daniel Defoe is rather the father of the modern journalism, right? The father of modern journalism. And we can very well do research on the old text which have some present day relevance. But you must be very careful about, my lecture, it might sound relevant. That's to sense that in a sense that I prefer to speak, that I prefer to speak on the present day relevance of this pandemic with the plague. Therefore, it has got a relevance. And similarly, you can very well choose a pandemic discourse, a pandemic or a contemporary discourse. It could be that it could be even caste discrimination. It could be even gender discrimination. There was a response in the chat box which I read earlier about the feminist discourse, about the feminist perspective of this presentism. We can very well choose that we can very well choose all these things, and we can talk about the presentist response to these things. And while I was reading this Daniel Defoe, I also came across Amra, one of the most early women and novelists, and we can also work on them. As a gender disparity in the presentist context, caste violence in the presentist context, racist violence in the presentist context, even response to world wars, and even Schindler's List is a presentist response. And the small video that I have shared is also a presentist response to Daniel Defoe's The Plague. And it was not filmed in 2020. It was there in 1999. At 1999, that if you see the views, the total views of this small video was only some 3,000 or 4,000. And so that was the relevance that it had in the year 1999. But in 2020, this video, after this, that it might go viral. And many researches were done on this picnic and this picnic maker. This might even go viral after this 2020. So, dear researcher participant, be conscious of your presentist response to the contemporary discourse, to the contemporary context. Then you can extend your presentist critical inquiry into a historical or even to a contemporary text.
Thank you, sir. So there is another question. What is the difference between presentism and new historicism?
I think that I have already touched upon this.
Okay.
That I have drawn a parallel between these three things. Historicism talked about the objectivity. New historicism is a subject. New historicism is rather a subjective representation of history or subverting the history. And the very objective of this new historicism is giving prominence to the petty narratives, the parallel narratives, the small narratives. It is not talking about new historicism, it's not talking about the meta-narrative. And similarly, this presentism differs from new historic. We cannot dismiss saying that we cannot simply say that presentism is different from new historicism. Presentism, of course, has got its own root in historicism and in new historicism. In opposing historicism, in extending new historicism to an individual level. I told in the beginning that this is rather talking about an individual's response, an individual's formation of knowledge, a system where subjectivity plays a major role. And in the case of that, and in the case of this new historicism, it is the subjectivity in new historicism is not about the personal interpretation of history, but history is viewed as a subjective interpretation. But here we interpret a text with our subjective knowledge system, with a consumerist. This is with a consumerist tendency. I approach the text with an agenda. I approach a text with my personal system of knowledge. Perhaps this is the difference that one could find in. This is what Peter Barry also talked about. We cannot dismiss the earlier theories. All the theories are only the extension of the previous theories. And presentism is, of course, it is an extension of this new historicism.
Thank you, sir. So there are a few more questions, sir, that we will send you through email, and we'll get the answers and we'll send them, sir. Because it's already 12:30, I think. Now we can wind up.
Before we wind up, I congratulate Dr. Prabahar for this excellent presentation. I detect a tone of hope and optimism in his speech, in his presentation. Let us all be hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Respected Professor Prabahar, sir, respected learned professors who are part of this lecture, and dear participants. Now, as I told you in the beginning itself, that Professor has made such a wonderful presentation, connecting a text which was rather unknown to many of us, and he connected that text with the literary theories and to the present scenario. So it is such a wonderful time that we spend when we listen to Professor Prabahar. Now, when he speaks about such social issues, he will not speak them as social issues. No, he will connect them with the literary theories and with seminal literary texts. So this manifests his scholarship in literary texts and also literary theories. So today, he has enthralled all of us with such a presentation. Even he has given a video that he spoke to me in the morning, and he said that you should share this video with the participants, and my lecture is based on that video. And while I was watching the video, I could easily understand what is that he's going to speak about. No, he has gathered all the information related to that particular video, and when we watched his PPT and his mode of explanation, it was stunning, sir. Now that you have collected so much of information and you have arranged them, and the way you connect those things, those theories, the concepts with the present happenings, and the interpretation of a literary text is really amazing. And thank you very much, sir, for yet another literary feast that you have delivered today. And we are hopeful that we'll be getting more and more in future. Thank you, sir, for this wonderful lecture. On behalf of the participants, on behalf of my department, I wish to extend our sincere gratitude for your sincere and wonderful efforts in delivering such an extraordinary lecture. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Batmanaban. I wish you all the best. My wishes are always with the Department of English, Bharatiyar University. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.